Welcome to the DaVinci Hour podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Maxwell Cooper, and in this podcast series, I interview physicians, medical innovators, and entrepreneurs making an impact on healthcare. This podcast is produced by DaVinci Academy, a multimedia medical education company that provides podcasts, video courses, and digital textbooks. You can see more on our website, www.dviacademy.com, and our YouTube channel, youtube.com/c/DaVinci Academy Med. This podcast is sponsored by Doc2Doc, the personal lending platform designed for doctors by doctors. Do you have some big expenses in the near future? Maybe you're moving, applying to residency or fellowship, fixing up your car or home, or starting a new practice. Doc2Doc believes that traditional lenders overestimate the risk of lending money to doctors, residents, and medical students, focusing too much on the challenges of their financial past and giving them insufficient credit for the promise of their financial future. Check out Doc2Doc's personal loan options at doc2doclending.com/DaVinci. Hey everybody, welcome back to the DaVinci Hour podcast. I'm honored this week to be joined by Dr. Amit Mehta, who is a interventional radiologist, a serial medtech entrepreneur, and a venture capitalist. So Dr. Mehta, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us.
No, thanks for having me.
Awesome. So maybe give us a little bit of background about, where you went to school, where you did your residency training, and maybe just a general overview of your clinical practice.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up actually in Canada, of all places, and did undergrad and medical school there, and was working on some projects at the time with a specific interest sort of in computer applications in medicine, and that a lot of the northern part of Canada is underserviced. And it was this is before teleradiology or telemedicine was a thing. Had some early ideas for incepting a teleradiology, telemedicine. So this is before even I was going into radiology, but thought that there was an opportunity to deliver care, over quote unquote internet. Again, I'm dating myself, but not as robust as it was back then. We used to use those 2400 baud dial-in modems and bulletin boards. But the nascent idea of this telemedicine environment was kicking around in my head. So couldn't find that avenue to express myself sort of entrepreneurially in Canada. So applied and went to residency at Harvard in the Mass General system. And so did all my training there, and specifically continued to have an interest in computer applications in medicine, and specifically then in radiology. Radiology was just a specialty that suited my personality really well, just tech enabled, on the cutting edge, both from a technology standpoint as well as a medical device standpoint, which is something else I had interest in. So went through training there, ran a lab, ran some courses, wrote some books, and got really involved in that ecosystem, which, was a great place to train just because the resources were unbelievable. I wanted to write a book, and so they hooked me up with Springer as a publisher, and I wanted to run a CME course. They hooked me up with a CME person, and so did all that stuff. And then while I was there, ran a lab that did some early work in installing the first sort of PACS system in the country, which was the move from film in radiology to computers, which, people today, I think we take for granted that everything is read on a computer and we have 3D slices and all this sort of stuff. But back then we were still reading, and this is, 2005, we were reading on film. And so installed that and got interested in AI and medical device and a lot of things that were going on in that Boston, Harvard, MIT ecosystem, and really enjoyed doing that. So continued doing that while maintaining sort of my trade craft as a radiologist. Then sort of finished residency and did interventional radiology, again, sort of minimally invasive image guided surgery, specific because I had an interest in medical devices and developing medical devices. Had some ideas that ran patents around and sort of worked on early sort of company formation and trying to figure that out. At that time, while I was doing that and working on these devices, I got really involved with regulatory for medical devices and the FDA and understanding how all that worked. And at the time, there was an evolution in imaging, specifically from the FDA's standpoint, in that the FDA had put out position papers and understanding that imaging was acceptable as a surrogate biomarker to what conventionally had been biomarkers for drug trials. So, for example, if you had a liver cancer hepatoma drug, traditionally you would give the drug and you would measure serial AFPs in a patient, and that blood level would tell you whether the drug was active or inactive. But the FDA realized that that was a little bit more qualitative than quantitative, and if there was a quantitative way of measuring this, it was better. And a CAT scan or CT scan is much better. You can look at a tumor and it's 10 centimeters, and you give the drug, and now it's 2 centimeters. Much more objective evidence that that drug was working. So they started to approve imaging as a surrogate biomarker to these blood markers, and so that built an entire industry around using imaging. So at that time, I sort of returned back to Canada. Felt bad, it's a little bit of a brain drain out of Canada. I spent probably a 20th or a 50th on my medical education in Canada compared to the U.S. I started working there and set out to sort of start this this company where we could use imaging in clinical trials. Found a pretty big headwind in Canada at the time: entrepreneurship, venture, money, all of that. I just happened to be very young because I'd gone through medical school very quickly. So I was 23, 24 at the time. Wasn't cool back then to raise money. You were just a kid and no one really took you seriously. So started sort of shopping the idea around and found myself in Texas, where the group, when I pitched the idea here, as there was two components to it. There was a business infrastructure component, and then there was a clinical medical component. I needed a bunch of radiologists to read these images. They said, look, we'll be the radiology group who reads for this company, and signed up as angel investors into the company. And luckily, several years later, 2 years ago, we sold the company to a public, which all the stuff is sort of public, for a great outcome for everybody.
That's amazing. That's Intrinsic Imaging? Was that the name of that company?
Yeah. That was Intrinsic Imaging, right? Which is one of the only 4 what are called imaging CROs. Okay. And we had interestingly, that dovetails into, my early interest. When you start a company like that, you're generic in terms of we were doing MSK trials, oncology trials, neuro trials, whatever it was, medical device. Our sort of expertise was primarily around AI and running AI trials, specifically in radiology and imaging. So just about a year before we had sold the company, we had essentially run every AI trial for every FDA approved product in the US for radiology, except for 1 or 2 products. So we had become experts in sort of understanding the application of AI and application of computer technologies, whether it's CAD, AI, machine learning, neural nets, whatever you want to call it, in imaging specifically, which, for AI in our generation here has become the sort of first foray into. There's lots of people saying this is going to put doctors out of business, but I can tell you, I think it's pretty far away.
Oh, that's amazing. So you were really on the kind of the early stages of vetting all these AI algorithms out there. So that was it sounds like a big part of your company's work was doing the actual clinical trials to verify those algorithms. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So we had, there's a clinical component and then there's a technical component. And for the regulatory perspective, the FDA wants to know if you're using it as a quote unquote medical device, is it doing what it's going to say? And so we were running these trials, and they're called MRMC, or multi-reader, multi-case trials, where you would double blind and put patients in images in and have radiologists read with and without the AI, with a certain amount of time in between to forget the images, et cetera. There's a whole infrastructure of a system that had been developed by the FDA and developed by academics to say this is how you can test an algorithm to ensure that it actually is providing clinical benefit. So a lot of the early sort of breast mammo, we sort of extended that through other parts of the body, liver, brain, bones, et cetera.
That's amazing. And then you started this when you were early in practice, out of training. And then I guess, what was your role? Were you like chief medical officer? And I guess, how did you balance that with your practice?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I feel like I ran 2 full-time jobs for about 7 or 8 years, but it was a combination of, I was the founder, the chief medical officer, the sort of plugged in computers and hired people and fired people. But over the course of the first couple of years, we did hire a full C-suite. And we had, for a business like that, there's a lot of regulatory scrutiny. So we had project managers and QA people, and the company started originally out of Texas, but ended up pulling and moving the roots to Boston, where, I trained and had connections into Mass General. And we used to use a lot of the radiologists out of Mass General as well when we needed specialty work, just because of the amount of research and some of the more specific clinical trials were better suited out of there. So we had operations in 3 places, of which Boston was the headquarters.
Oh, that's amazing. And then you exited very recently. Is that correct?
Yeah, we sold the company in 2021 to a large global company called WCG, which is the largest sort of clinical trial company now in the world. They were on a sort of spree. They went public in July of 2021, and part of that was an opportunity for them to roll up various pieces in the clinical trial chain. And so they had an IRB piece and a data management piece and DSMB piece and et cetera. And one piece they were missing was the imaging component. And so we were a good fit for rounding out the offering as they went public so that they can go to pharma and say, look, we have a full suite of offering of all the tools that you need to run a clinical trial. So we were acquired, somewhat of an acqui-hire. I stayed on for a couple of years just to help, but also an economic, exit for us as investors, as operators, as the ideation folks. So all in all, was a good exit for everybody.
Interesting. I'm curious that one of my attendings told me recently there's something like, you would probably know better than me, maybe like 600-700 AI companies, like radiology AI companies specifically out there. I'm curious, based on your experience, like obviously we can't have 700 AI companies probably for just radiology. I'm curious which of those, like what characteristics do you think will be the ones that last or that are with us for the long term?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know the number. I think for the numbers that we had in terms of companies that we were looking at doing trials, there were sub 100, but there's a lot of components that go into it besides just the technology. I mean, are they funded? Can they afford a clinical trial? Do they need FDA approval? Are they operating in the US or just outside the US? Is it a radiologist driven product or just an automated product? So there's lots of pieces that go into that, but I think in the US, the biggest piece of this is who is going to pay for this, right? And that's always been the issue, is that there's no reimbursement category for the AI piece of it, except for mammography. Mammography many years ago, people fought the fight with Congress and got reimbursement for specifically computer applications in mammography. And it wasn't necessarily AI, it was sort of CAD, which is 1.0, which was just detection. But there has been no advance in that reimbursement piece. And we've seen lots of companies come and go, venture back to the tune of 100 million, not, had no product for sale because there's no buyer. If you look at the constituents in the healthcare system, there's three, right? There's the patient, there's the provider, and there's the payer in a very generic scope. We've learned in the experience of 3D mammography that patients don't want to pay for anything, right? We expect insurance to pay for all of our healthcare if we have insurance, and those who are uninsured typically don't pay for healthcare. So the patient's not paying for it. The provider doesn't have the capacity to pay for it, right? Our reimbursement as a provider is just going down every year. So there's less in the pie for the provider. And economically, it doesn't really make sense. If I'm making $20 to read a CT scan, it's not economically viable for me to pay $5 for an algorithm that detects a lung nodule, $5 for an algorithm that detects a rib fracture, $5 for an algorithm that detects a PE, $5 for it goes on. I mean, there's not enough in that bucket. So they're out. And then you've got the payers left, and the payers don't want to pay for anything. So when we can't even get payers to pay for things that are legit, right? I mean, we get denied on claims that are legitimate, and that's a whole separate discussion. So there's no constituent in the healthcare system who's going to pay for this. So I think there was a rash of AI companies that pulled out at the beginning, just like the sort of chat GPT generative AI stuff now, right? There's a huge rash of these companies. People think it's amazing, and conceptually it makes a lot of sense. And as a VC who looks at a lot of decks, I looked at hundreds of these companies at the beginning, and all of them had slide number one, which was very appropriate. It said there is a shortage of doctors, and especially a shortage of radiologists, with an incredible explosion in the number of images. And they always have this graph where number of images is going up exponentially and number of doctors is going down linearly. So from an investor standpoint, that as an addressable market makes a lot of sense. But you have to be a healthcare, I think, investor to get into the weeds to realize that despite all that, there's no one who can pay for it. And the only payer that sort of come out of it is probably the vendors. So, GE, Siemens, et cetera, will buy something, an algorithm to put on a piece of equipment so that they have a value add, that their machine is better than somebody else's. But they're also not dumb. They're big companies. They've spent their own capital on developing their own AI products in-house. So Siemens we recently bought a Siemens CT scanner. It came with a chest nodule algorithm that they had built in. They didn't buy that from someone. Siemens Research helped the years develop the algorithm themselves.
Wow, that's really interesting. I guess shifting gears a little bit, you, in addition to AI and clinical trial work, you also have done medical device development as well. I'm curious how you got into doing that, and was this something you always wanted to do, or was it more just a matter of kind of seeing clinical needs, as a first, as an end user, as an interventional radiologist?
Yeah, I mean, that's where it started. I have to say, I mean, as an interventional, it's like you're using a ton of equipment, and interventional radiology was a place where there was a lot of innovation and development over the years. So, I was seeing new devices come out all the time, and just sort of had an idea of tinkering and just sort of building and doing that. And so I got interested in medical devices very early on, and developed a couple that went down sort of the patent pathway, and then started to sort of create a company around that. And that's when I got more interested in investing. I was trying to raise money for some of those medical device companies and realized the challenge. And there's a certain level of expertise as a physician, especially as a device sort of operator and user, that is valuable when you're sort of starting a company. And so I realized that investors listened, because we were subject matter experts on this, and sort of got deeper and deeper into that world. And then when I moved into Texas, started working with incubators and J&J Labs and some of these other places doing medical device development. So currently we have a spinal fusion device in development. We got very interested in that early on, and that segued into a career into investing. Just sort of those two things go hand in hand, right? There's the development and the operations component, and then there's the investment component, raising money for that, which in and of itself is a whole different skill set. So, I had surrounded myself with a lot of folks who were really good at we all realized very early on, we're all good at the operation development part. None of us were good at the fundraising part. So I sort of said, they all kind of said, well, why don't you do the fundraising part? Because you like to talk more than everybody else. So off I went on the fundraising part. And that's how that career evolved in itself.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was going to ask you how you also you're not only a business operator, but you're also an investor now, a venture capitalist. And so is this the Builders VC? Is that the first fund you've been a part of, or was this something you previously had been a part of as well?
No, so we're Builders VC. We're on our second fund. So the first fund was 175 million. The second fund's 250 million. So just 400-ish in under management. Prior to that, we had two other funds called Formation 8, which was a total of about just under $1 billion in management. Very same thesis, Series A and seed funds. So early investors, pretty much tech investors, which was interesting because it was a departure from my original sort of medical device. We don't do any drug or device, just because the regulatory cycle and time it takes for approval is outside the window of a Series A seed fund in terms of where we need our returns to be for our LPs. So it was a little bit different, but the environment, the understanding, the sort of running these investments, understanding due diligence and how to do this thing is all very similar skill set. And so I was a venture partner in the prior funds and sort of got my feet wet, learned how to do it, made some investments, sat on boards, did all of that work over the course of several years, and then matriculated into being a general partner in these funds, in this last fund, and which is a different responsibility set and a different, both from a responsibility, from an economic standpoint, from a responsibility standpoint. It's very much more dependent on the general partners of a fund. So it's been the culmination of, this is the fourth fund I've been part of over the course of the last decade.
That's really cool. I'm curious, you have that unique perspective, both as an operator and then a business operator, and then also as an investor. People come up with ideas all the time, especially in, digital health or med tech. And I'm curious, how do you evaluate ideas? I guess one is like, when you as an entrepreneur think, because I'm sure you've had many ideas over the course of your career, like which ones did you decide to go with? And then I guess kind of a two-part on the investor side, like how do you, say like, what, that's an idea I want to go with as an investor.
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting, I think as physicians are sort of type A and very, there is very little fake it till you make it kind of thing. It's very, you can't fake it till you make it, because you got to know how to do the surgery or the procedure before you get in there. So, it's a different mindset than most, I think, I would say, investors, venture capital, that really wanted to be a master of the domain before, took responsibility for deploying other people's money, like in a fund. And so I sort of saw it in three spheres of influence. One was truly as an operator and understanding. And you hear lots of operators who become VCs because truly, I mean, you understand what the operators are going through and you can help these companies navigate as you sit on the board. So there was one in the Venn diagram, there was the sphere of influence as an operator, the sphere of influence as an investor, and understanding, how to write a term sheet and what pari passu means and what pay to play means and all of those sort of things. And then this sphere of influence, which I sort of believe is a secret weapon as a clinician. And so as a healthcare investor, digital health's a little different, but for most healthcare, like what I just explained to you on AI for payer provider, like I don't think I would understand that unless I was on the ground and as a user, and a lot of these things come because of that clinical experience and understanding how payers pay us and all the trials and tribulations of insurance and how patients believe the way they navigate the healthcare system and how providers understand that, whether we like it or not, there's an economic component to medicine and that drives a lot of decisions. So a lot of those pieces come from being a clinician. And that's why I've not ever let that go in terms of part of what I just think that's sort of one of my secret sauces, is understanding from the clinician's perspective. And so to answer your question, we look at a lot of investments, right? I mean, we look at a couple hundred a week of stuff that comes in. And I have to say a lot to entrepreneurs. It's a lot of, the things sort of the investments shake out in two buckets very initially. One is that a lot of these investments are good. They're just not right for a fund like ours. Like we are a seed or a Series A fund. So if it's a late stage Series C investment, it's not something we would do. Just the economics and the mechanics don't work for the type of fund we are. It's not that it's a bad investment. It's just not where we are. Or a pre-seed investment that's an idea on a napkin. We're funding things that have product market fit and already have revenue. So right off the bat, we sort of eliminate a lot of investment and we don't look that deep, not because they're bad, they just don't fit our investment profile. And of the ones that fit our investment profile in venture, there's a power law theory in venture of the way you have to invest in that. If you look at it, 95% of venture investments go to zero. It's the 5% that return all the money for a fund. So we're really looking for category killer platform type investments. And, excuse the pun, but in medicine, it's the difference between an antibiotic and a vitamin. We're looking for antibiotics, not vitamins. And so it's not to say vitamins are bad. And there's lots of vitamins that have hit it big. But as a fund in a repetitive sort of fashion that learns from our pattern of investing, we're looking for antibiotics that are essential to the system rather than vitamins.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. And then it's interesting. I think people don't fully understand that, like how funds, especially physicians, like how funds work, how there's that timetable. And, I have a brother who's in private equity. So he tells me about these, 5-6 year funds and all those types of things. So I'm a little bit aware, but that's interesting to hear your perspective as being on the VC side of things. I'm curious, when you're, if you're doing a device or something, before that venture stage, and you've got a device and you're looking for, you realize you can't just fund this yourself, even if you're, a busy physician with a good salary. I guess what type of investors do you think are the best in those, like, in terms of like angel investors or family and friends type round? Like, is it better to just find people that will give you money and kind of just let you run with it? Or is it better to find people with like the experience that can kind of, help advise you? I guess what's been your experience with that, and how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I tell everyone the same thing. Get the dollar from wherever you can get it. To me, it is the hardest thing in the world to raise money, whether it's us as a fund raising from LPs who are institutional investors like a state endowment down to your neighbor. It's hard. Like you have to convince people that you are smart enough, good enough, to basically take their dollars and give them a return. So, my advice typically just take it wherever you can get it. But if you had a choice, yeah, obviously, more intelligent, and I don't mean, IQ wise, more connected, seasoned, experienced investors are better in that they can help you navigate stuff that you may or may not know. But angel groups are great. We run an angel group here locally. I do. And we deploy capital and bring together people who have interest in angel investing, and then friends and family, obviously. And then, the conventional two guys in a garage maxing out their credit cards. I mean, if you have conviction over something and you think it's that good, it goes a long way to show people that, you've watched Shark Tank probably, right? Like I spent all my money and maxed out all my credit. I mean, people look at that. I mean, you obviously have conviction over what you're doing, as opposed to when it's someone else's dime, it's a lot easier to spend their money than yours. Like I always try to, when we look at companies and we're about to make an investment in Series A and the CEO is making, 700 grand or something like that. Like it just, you're a startup, you're asking to raise $3 or $4 million. Like the CEO can't make that much. So it's very important for optics to make sure that you are aligned with your investors.
That's interesting. On another side of it, building a startup, I guess, what's your advice on like finding co-founders and people to actually build this with you? I guess, because in a way, it's almost like a marriage. I mean, you're legally, especially if you give them equity, like you're tied to these people, and it's very messy to get, if you have to go separate ways. So I'm curious, like, how you vet people that you would want to, start a company with and do this and, do this long term with.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's been natural in that, friends or colleagues that we were discussing things and it just made sense that we came up with the ideas together. But I think if you're starting something and you need a co-founder, whether, and, most of the time it may be, for example, I mean, I'm not a full-time coder, I can do some basic coding, but if I'm building a tech-enabled telemedicine app, then I'm going to need a CTO co-founder. So my advice for that has always been, one, you got to get along, and two, just make sure that everyone's skill sets are, that the Venn diagram crosses over, but where it crosses over is pretty small, and that person is on the team and doing things because they do things that you can't. Because the places where I've seen a lot of startups trip up is where there's two CEOs, and I can tell you the worst pitches we get are when there's co-CEOs and they're talking all over each other because they both have the same skill set and they both have the same expertise. And so when one person says something that the other one doesn't like, then they interrupt and contradict what their other CEO said, and it's always a mess. So make sure that if you're starting a company like that and you think it's going to be big someday, you want to retain equity, right? So you only want to give equity where you really need it. So if you have two co-founders who are experts in spinal fusion devices, you only need one. And then you need a technical person, an engineer, and you need a business person who can sell and et cetera. So, complement your team, both skill set and outlook kind of, personality wise, as opposed to just sort of haphazardly putting a bunch of people together. You end up paying for it in the long run.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'm curious, you're still practicing, interventional radiology, you're doing entrepreneurship, you're doing VC. How do you balance all this stuff? I mean, what does your like week to week schedule look like?
I sleep 8 hours a night now.
Really?
When I was first getting into all of this and sort of deciding sort of where to go and what I wanted to do, what I kind of realized that one of my superpowers was multitasking and being able to organize and compartmentalize. And, what you realize, or what I realize in a lot of these things that I do, that there's sprints in certain things. So we may be working on an investment right now that is 50 hours this week. But once we're through that investment and we've written that check, there's a lull where we're looking for our next investment, where the amount of work necessary for that next piece is nowhere close to the due diligence, the lawyers, all of the work we're doing in putting this investment together right now. And so there's time in that, where most people sort of go, okay, I'm going to just breathe and relax in that lull. When that, that curve comes down, I just pick up one of my other things and work on those things. So I would say that is the biggest part. And then there's a second piece of that, which, as an operator and a technician and an interventional radiologist, over time, what's interesting has become is that a lot of the skill set of doing the cases that I'm doing have become very second nature to me because I've done thousands and thousands of them. And so it's not, I remember when I first started, every night I would look up the cases the night before, watch YouTube videos, read about it, and stressed every night for 10 years probably, right? Like, I want to make sure, even though there were things that were routine to me, it was always someone's life, but over time, as you just become a lot more facile, it's very, very rote, and it becomes very second nature to you that stress goes away, and it opens up a huge opportunity to do other things. So believe me, for the first 10 years of my clinical career, I was very focused on just that to just become the best at what I could do and understand how to do that sort of skill set.
That's really interesting. And I think, yeah, I mean, it's also building a great team. It sounds like what you've done with many of your ventures. And then, I think keeping things, keeping yourself focused when you need to be, and then shifting that focus to, like you said, the next venture, the next project. That's really cool.
I'm really 87. I know I look 21. But
I'm curious in terms of like physician entrepreneurship. Like, I guess as if you have all these things going on, why do you continue? Some people may ask, why do you continue to practice? Like, what, especially like, it sounds like you keep a pretty full clinical schedule. Have you ever thought about going part-time, or just not even, or just leaving clinical practice altogether? I guess why do you keep doing clinical practice is my question.
yeah, believe me, every day I think about that, where, what, how, and I still love it. Like, that was truly my first love. And, the beauty and the thing I think every day is that for me, I found the right specialty. Like, I read I'm on a lot of forums and things about alternative things for physicians, do this consulting, work for a drug company, go do this, because everyone's not happy with their job. And I get it. And I have lots of friends who are in that. Like, if I had to do a lot of EMR, documentation, I think I'd probably be in the same boat. But the radiology specifically and interventional radiology is exactly 100% suited to my mindset, skill set, and outlook for everything that I do. There's days where, believe me, when I'm taking call at 3 a.m. in the ER, and someone comes in and with a lump that they've had for 4 years, and they end up in the ER at 3 a.m. just because everything was closed. Like, I get frustrated, but for the most part, 95% of the time, I mean, this is the perfect fit for me. I found the fit. And if it didn't fit, I think I'd be a lot less hesitant to just let it go. That's the biggest part. And then the other part is what I was mentioning before. I just think being on the ground and understanding the changes in healthcare and the applicability of technology and what's going on just makes me a better investor. We've, passed on several investments where I was like, you know what, this is a great idea. I mean, I would love to have this, but it's just not going to work because there's no payer, there's no this, there's no that. And sure enough, I maintain a database of following these investments out, and don't get me wrong, I've made mistakes and missed on investments that became, public multi-billion-dollar companies, but the hit rate is pretty high on the ones that, had sort of foreseen that are going to not fail, but are not going to get the traction that they really wanted.
Interesting. I'm curious, is also on the physician entrepreneurship front, like you said, many physicians are kind of looking for, side hustles or other opportunities and things like that. I guess, what's your advice on, because I think I don't have to tell you this, you've been down this road many times, is that entrepreneurship, while it can be very rewarding and lucrative, it's also very risky. And I guess, what's your advice to, because a physician, if you stay practicing, you have a stable salary, you have job security. If you try to do, venture or, build a company or anything like that, you're taking a lot more risk. I guess, what's your advice on physicians contemplating that, vetting? I guess, they have these ideas, or they have, a thought about a business. I guess, what's your advice on that, how they should vet and really, I guess, weigh those pros and cons of pursuing that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, physicians in general are type A, high functioning folks, but I think they also miss the fact that this stuff is not easy. And I think you really need to, before you start on a venture like this, to sit down and have some introspection and really, am I that person? Like, can I do more than one thing? Can I multitask well? Am I, I come home at 6:30 and then eat dinner and then work for a few hours while other people, other friends of mine have finished Netflix, right? So it's sort of, you got to figure out who you are and if it's the right fit. I think you look at your neighbor, your friend, your colleague, and you say, well, if they're doing it, I can do it. Well, it's not always, those are the people that I found that get into it and then realize that, I should have never done it because it's not my personality. Like, I see others doing it, other physicians doing it, and therefore I want to do it, but it's not the right fit. So it's really some introspection to, why am I doing this? Is it because I truly believe in this and I really want to do it and I love it and I'm going to put the extra, 80 to 100 hours a week in? Or is it just because somebody else is doing it and I think it's cool and I'm burnt out? If you're burnt out, then go find something else to do other than, and I have a friend of mine who's a vascular surgeon, who just, guy's 42, he's leaving. And sure enough, he's going to do real estate. I mean, there are other avenues that you can do as a physician entrepreneur that don't have to be medical devices, investing, whatever. The other thing I would tell people to do is first is become an angel investor, allocate some portion of capital and go make some angel investments and be involved in the companies that you're working with, and try to be sector specific. Pick medical, healthcare type startups where you have some edge. And like we were talking about before, the entrepreneur, again, should take all the money they can get, but your dollar is probably worth something more as a physician. And tell them, I'll help you. I want to, help you grow your business and be involved, and then get an understanding for what that process looks like and what that entrepreneur is going through, and then decide. The one good thing about medicine is you have this safety net, this base of this day job sort of, which is busy, which is, make no mistake, right? People are seeing 70, 80 patients. I mean, we do a ton every day. So it's not like there's a lack of not being busy. So take the time to decide whether it's the right move for you.
Sure. Well, awesome. My last question I ask everybody is, when you're not doing, interventional radiology and venture and entrepreneurship, how do you balance your life if you can find that balance?
Yeah, it's funny. We do a lot of sort of outdoorsy kind of things and try to stay healthy. But I always kind of like the Zuckerberg thing. I pick something each year and try to work on that. So this year I've decided generative AI is going to be something I'm going to focus on and sort of figure out. So I built a store that automatically through ChatGPT generates art with a description and an artist, and then puts it on a Shopify store, and then every 15 minutes generates a new piece of art, and it's all automated and sells this art. And so we've sold 30 paintings so far. It's been up a week and a half, but those kinds of things, or tinker around with technology, is something that I have deep interest in and like understanding. And then, human longevity and just different things each year that I kind of try to focus on and do a deep dive and get a deep understanding and try to make either changes or moves in those different segments.
Very cool. I guess the last thing is, where can people find out more about you or connect with you? And are there any platforms you're active on or anything you want to promote?
Yeah, LinkedIn's probably a good place in terms of being more, from a business standpoint, being more centralized. I mean, I'm on all the social media platforms as well, but you can put my email in the show notes as well, and straight up just email. I mean, we're always on email and have people looking at that stuff all the time. So if you're a company or an entrepreneur that has an idea, I mean, happy to look at a deck and see if it's a fit. Again, just because we say no to something doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It's just, it may not fit our investment criteria as a fund at Builders. But yeah, happy to help and look at anything that people are working on. Love physician entrepreneurs and love what they're doing. So happy to help anybody who's either an operator, an entrepreneur, or a physician, or even in other non-adjacent segments, or your listeners who may be doing stuff. Like I said, I'm always looking at adjacent technologies and other things. So we have some expertise in those other things, or have partners who do that kind of stuff as well. So love looking at those things and understanding new ideas and what people are working on.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much again for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate being on the show.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DaVinci Hour podcast, presented by DaVinci Academy. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your podcast platform of choice to catch the latest episodes. Please leave a comment or a review and share it with a friend. Lastly, you can find all of our podcasts, video courses, and books on our website, dviacademy.com. Thank you for listening.